anybody who's holding these positions of power right now, any mistakes that they're making, any any potential damage they're causing to the institutions that they lead, it's just for a little bit more. And there's a lot of people that are either placed in exile, like myself, and a lot of the DOJ that were pushed out that are watching and with no malice or thoughts of retribution in their heart, who want to serve and correct if there are broken pieces, to pick them up and rebuild. And I think we're all going to be prepared for that.
Hi there, everybody. He said, "I'll take the wrench." It is, of course, a reference to an exquisite scene in the iconic movie Good Will Hunting, when Robin Williams' character finally breaks through to Matt Damon's character, and Damon is describing his foster father's sadistic abuse, in which Damon's character is forced to choose if he will be beaten with a stick, a belt, or a wrench. Robin Williams says the belt, and Damon says, "I went with the wrench." And that is how the man described by Jack Smith as a folk hero within the FBI described the choice he made to stand on principle and protect the men and women of the FBI from Donald Trump's political retribution. The story's only begun to be known by people like us publicly, and we're thrilled to be able to hear some of it here. So without any further ado, this is The Best People, and this is one of them, former acting director of the FBI, Brian Driscoll. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
No, it's our honor. I have to say, listening to you describe what you did as the wrench, I felt like I got it. And I know you don't want to be lifted up, so I'll try to do as little of that as possible. But I just wonder if you can talk about what you left behind, the men and women who are still there, and what you think they're dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, besides the fact that that job was more than a job, it was a life's purpose for me. It was a calling for those who choose to do it. I mean, you hear, cliches about little kids, like I want to be a G-man or G-woman or be an FBI agent when I grow up. That's a large part of what it is. And
do you remember how old you were when you first knew that's what you wanted to do?
Yeah, I remember I had a conversation with my dad when I was in high school, and I was a mediocre student at best. I was more of an athlete. So he had a conversation with me because I was kind of not listless in a bad way or rudderless. But he's like, you know what? Like, you have kind of an analytical mind. The only classes I got A's in were English, and I like to write. And he's like, you make a good detective, I think. And so that planted a seed that really didn't start to sprout until my senior year in college when 9/11 happened. And I had two uncles in the towers. One uncle was my dad's best friend. I grew up calling uncle. Another was my mother's brother. One worked for Canner and didn't make it, and the other made it out. And it was in that moment during my senior year. The only job I had before was making pizza since I was 14 and working pizza shops all through high school and college. And the place I worked at, like, hey, you and this other guy, you're going to franchise a place in Jersey. And we were like, yes, we were going to do that. And then the towers came down and Pentagon got hit. And I remember sitting on the roof of the really rough house we were living in Villanova. And he's like, I can't do this. And I was like, neither can I. We got to serve. And so I really hyper-focused on taking this route.
What did you do next? I mean, how did you put that sort of decision and determination into action?
I was one of many of that generation, I'll say it, or my peer group that intended to immediately enlist in the military. And my uncle, who made it out of Ground Zero, he also served in the military. And I think he, with some prodding from my mother, grabbed me and was like, nope, you're going to go this route instead. I was sitting on a scholarship to go to Pepperdine for graduate school that I intended on abandoning. And I ended up doing that instead. It's a regret that took me 15 years to outrun for not joining the military. And then a certain operation I went on when I was on the hostage rescue team helped wash that regret away.
Syria?
Yes. Yeah.
Tell me about Syria.
I can't share too much about it because of the unit I was embedded with. It was a special operations unit based out of Fort Bragg. But it was related to holding ISIS members who held Kayla Mueller hostage, and just unspeakable acts towards Kayla and others, and holding Yazidi women slaves. Abu Sayyaf was the oil emir, and he was the primary target of that operation. The reason I was involved with two other members of the hostage rescue team is because the FBI hostage rescue team is the only element of the FBI trained to a level where they're not a liability on the target. And the reason we go is to be a critical enabler and to establish a law enforcement pure chain of custody for all evidence or people apprehended to be brought back and held accountable in a United States court of law. And that was why my presence was there. While we were on that target, we were met with some significant resistance from a lot of ISIS fighters. And my actions on target were, how do I say it? I don't want to come across as arrogant or bravado, but it was in support to the accomplishing the mission among many, all of the people that were on that specific operation. So we came back from that and went back into where we were staging out of across the border, and kind of doing an after-action review, an unofficial after-action review with the fellow military operators I was fortunate to be embedded with, and explained the regret that I was feeling, not in a world's smallest violin way, like poor me, like, and given like we were operating on very little sleep, just sharing, and they just kind of looked at me like sideways, like, "What, are you kidding me? Like, you have regret because of that?" And then I started to process, like, yeah, you're right. And so the permission they gave me to not feel that regret, among many others, washed that away, and I was able to move forward from that.
Do you feel like your service is sort of everything that happened before Syria and then everything that happens after? I mean, does that because I've listened to some of the things you've said about standing on the shoulders of the men and women you work with and really viewing it as a we, not an I. Is that part of your entire time at the FBI, or do you feel that really lived and then realizing this result in Syria?
It's the entirety of my career. There's nothing, and this lends to the point where I'm uncomfortable speaking about myself, but I'm very comfortable speaking about the people with whom I served. So it was from the beginning. There's no accomplishment or medal or, any
You've
of
had a
it.
lot of medals and accomplishments in the year. No fewer than 6 people told me not to ask you about that.
And I'm fortunate to be not just recognized, but the people I was with be recognized through that. And of course, I'm proud of them, but I'm more proud of the people that I was with when those events that those medals signify happened. And so, like, from day one of my career with the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, people invested in me. I was a kid straight out of grad school. I was 24 years old. I didn't know what I was doing. I knew how to talk to people, which is pretty important if you're going to be a special agent or really a good human, in my opinion. But every case that I was able to be a part of, whether it was working drugs or undercover, or when I came to the FBI and I was working La Cosa Nostra, Organized Crime Matters here, in the best city in the world, in New York, on the SWAT team, on the hostage rescue team. And then when I moved into management positions, trying to be a leader therein, it all compounded. I went from standing on a few shoulders, and then towards the end, 38,000 shoulders. There's nothing that I achieved that I did by myself. And I'm forever in debt to everybody with whom I served with, even if they're a pain in the ass sometimes.
What is it about the FBI that someone who is president for the second time would still not understand that the men and women inside of it aren't just not politically aligned against him, but have no politics?
So in order to provide some grace for anybody that feels that way about the men and women in the FBI, there is a lack of cultural competence. So, and a lack of effort to understand and get to know that is truly how it is. And by law, it has to remain as such with every individual that makes up the FBI and makes it great to all the way down to the FBI's mission to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution. We serve the American people in the office of the president and within the executive branch, and it goes down from there through DOJ. We're a component of DOJ. The American people deserve better than any agenda can offer. They deserve selfless service driven by that mission, and it cannot be compromised by any leaning of any sort. You know,
I mean, there's also like an operational piece where you can't just clear it out every 4 years, right? Like the things that you did in Syria built on the everything that you've done, I would imagine, every day for the 15 years before you end up there. So
yeah,
can
it's
you
continuity.
just talk about the what's being purged from it is the result of a political retribution campaign announced by Donald Trump and carried out very publicly by his leaders at DOJ and the FBI. But the consequence is to hollow out hundreds of years of expertise.
Yeah, it's devastating, to put it in one word. It's not a dramatic statement from where I'm sitting. I had a buddy on the hostage rescue team. He's a mentor, and still a great friend. And he used to say, you can't get 20 years of experience in less than 20 years. So it takes people to work their way from the academy. And the FBI is a very diverse workforce, experience speaking. And everybody brings something to the table. And it takes that because the FBI must be diverse in all ways because you need to reflect the people you serve and protect. And to lose those experiences collectively in how many people have been removed and unlawfully terminated is devastating to the mission. And I don't mean that to send a message that those who remain and fill those positions are less than. They are not. However, you can't get that experience back. You can if you just give them their jobs back. And I haven't spoken to anybody that's not motivated to continue to serve, myself included. But when you lose that, it is impactful, and it's much larger than a morale hit. It's especially now with what's happening around the world and in the Middle East. You're losing subject matter experts that offered not only what they've learned through their successes, but through their failures and through the challenges they've had to overcome. And that is a rough hurdle to get over.
What did you think when you watched Trump's obsession with sort of torquing the FBI in his first term with asking Jim Comey to, quote, see to it to let Mike Flynn go because he was a good guy, to the years-long obsession with Pete Strzok and Lisa Page, to the firings of people like Bill Priestap? And I mean, he went through what you're talking about, decades and decades of experience and expertise. When that happened, were you cognizant of it? Were you so deep in your own mission? Or what did you think during his first term?
It's a combination of both. So there was a level of it that was, I made it be just white noise because I trust the process. We have layers of processes to hold people accountable internally for any misconduct or, alleged corruption. And that is taken very seriously and investigated internally and then potentially pushed over to the DOJ through other systems that are in place through the rule of law. And I trust that process. We have an entire division.
And that's by
for
design,
internal
so that you guys
investigations and
stay
inspections.
focused on rescuing hostages and fighting crime and protecting child sex trafficking victims. And so,
Correct. And I was aware that I had the privilege to focus deeply
Right.
on what my particular mission was during those times.
okay. What were you doing in the first Trump term?
So I was, for the first half, I was on the hostage rescue team as a team leader. And then the second half, I was up here in New York, leading a squad on Long Island for human trafficking and child exploitation, who are amazing, still out there doing the things. It's a great success. And then I was also on the Joint Terrorism Task Force here in the city, mostly focusing on the continent of Africa, Western Europe, and Canada.
I'm just trying to understand what it is like now for agents who are maybe doing those kind of jobs now, because he's destroyed all those processes, right? That would have allowed someone working on human trafficking or on the hostage rescue team to just focus on their mission? Because I think we have an impossible time on the outside understanding the impact on the inside when people like you are fired and there's no process. There are no IGs. He fired them before he fired you.
Yep.
So tell me what it's like inside now.
I mean, it's hard for me to say because I'm out in these streets just like everybody else, right? But I'm not going to be cute about it and say that I don't talk to my former friends and colleagues and peers and such. I will say that they will not be, they will not fall into complacency, and they remain unafraid to do everything properly, legally, to accomplish the mission I said before. However, I have to believe there are a good amount of people that are concerned because not only is the current director's behavior and taskings unique to what we're used to based off of the leadership, especially occupying the director's office, and how public his statements are.
Mm-hmm. And conduct. The conduct's very public
conduct
too.
as well. Yeah, I mean, everybody sees it, and that they are not immune to that.
Mm-hmm.
But also the allocation of resources to things that are usually they're not allocated that much to.
All the personal security and
that is threat based.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can't speak to the level of threat he faces every day, and he may legitimately, because he was a public figure before he took office in a different space and a different level. So to say that he doesn't warrant a higher level of security would be irresponsible of me.
Right. Let's talk about the accident. I know you are committed to the belief that it was a clerical error. I think people who've covered Trump for a long time would just describe it as their incompetence, but I guess that's the same thing as a clerical error. I remember the video you did of the, no, it was so good because I was like, oh, this is brilliant. He's just going to remind Trump of what they do. It was about the top 10 worst criminals, right?
Yeah. I'm Brian Driscoll, and it's my honor to be representing the men and women of the FBI as acting director. I want to take a few minutes to share with you some of the important work these men and women have been doing across the country and around the world every day to keep the American people safe. I'll start with our top 10 list. The 10 most wanted fugitives list has been helping the FBI apprehend dangerous criminals for 75 years.
Talk about that and talk about what were you trying to do? I mean, we were on the outside with no access to you, but we surmised that you were sort of trying to push the focus because he was obsessed with purging the Bureau of anyone who'd been involved in what he did, which was absconding national defense information, and then the crime that took place on television, which seemed like an insane thing to do. And you seem to be trying to bring the focus back to the criminals and the crimes that you guys pursued.
Yeah, I mean,
it was the top 10.
It was,
right?
a legit, long-standing top 10 fugitive, not one that we added to the top 10 list right before we knew we were about to get it.
Which is what Kash Patel did.
Oh, that you said it, not me.
Okay. I said it.
So you know what? I was so resistant to speaking publicly or doing any video, not because I didn't believe in the importance of it. And I'd never done anything like that before. Great. You just, when you're in the rank and file, or leading a squad, or really everybody except the heads of divisions, you don't talk to the media. You're not supposed to.
What is it about the culture that makes you guys allergic to? It's not promotion. And I wonder if you regret it at all, but just telling your own story.
We're not supposed to. We.
I guess you're not supposed to have to.
Right. And again, speaking for as a former member of the rank and file, that's not something that we're allowed to do. There's very strict rules that go around that because of our clearances, because of commenting on ongoing investigations. So it's pushed up towards the leadership ranks who receive media training and how to communicate with the media, what you can say, what you can't say to not compromise the mission or the investigation and so forth. And really, I haven't met a lot of people that want to do it because we're so focused on just putting points on the board. And He was Longfellow, and I don't mean to sound haughty, but the Longfellow writes about like just toiling upwards in the night while others, sleep. There's a lot of pride we take in that. We don't do it for the pats on the back or the chest bumps or the beating your chest and bragging about it. We do it because we're supposed to, and that's what we signed up for. And we just when we do have our successes and achieve significance and lasting impact without our names on it, that's what we really care about. That's what I care about.
So you end up running this bureau made up of people you love. Then what happens?
It was just surreal, and just personally felt a little bit chaotic. And thankfully, I was there with one of my closest friends, Rob
Who was
Hussein.
supposed to be on,
Yeah,
right? He was supposed to be the director, and you're,
yeah. And then the White House published the list of interim heads of all the agencies, and it was my name, and it was really surreal. And we just kind of doing one of these, and we were met with like, "Wait, are you okay with this?" And Rob and I are so close, and we were on the SWAT team together here, and trust each other, and we were surrounded by people we trust, around the bureau. And so we just, of course we're ready, because we're going to support each other. We're in this together. It doesn't matter what seat. If you're at the head of the table or I'm in the head of the table, it's flat, and we're partners, and the whole bureau is going to be our partners in this. And it took some time, and this was my perception, to earn the trust of the top 20, 30 of the bureau who had hired me like 2 or 3 times to be in the positions that I had tried to earn. And now all of a sudden, I'm in Newark running that division for 3 weeks, and all of a sudden I'm on top of the bureau. Like, I know how I would feel about me if I was in their shoes, kind of giving the side eye. Not that they were super graceful and amazing and took me under their wings, but I wouldn't sit at the director's desk for the first week. I couldn't do it. So I would sit at the conference table.
All day?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, running around to DOJ and talking to people. Like, I'm a social animal, and say, hey, checking on everybody because of the perceived chaos, trying to lower the temperature.
And what in your mind at this point is the best case scenario after Trump has publicly run on retribution, specifically against the FBI?
To protect the men and women in the FBI through proving that we are putting points on the board. Like,
so changing his mind, just like explaining.
Just through action. Like, I wasn't allowed to speak with him or anybody over there. And so it's like, okay, we will keep the momentum of the FBI's daily accomplishments going. I didn't have a grand media scheme. I was surrounded by brilliant, courageous people to guide me, which led to that video of like, hey, let's talk about this. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I kind of wish we did a little bit more of this with measure, talking about our successes after they were done. That was releasable. And the most regretful part of that video was the slow motion walking up those stairs. I had to walk up those stairs like 8 times because apparently I was walking weird. So it was my initial media experience.
There's no not weird way to walk. If anyone tries to get you to walk and talk,
so
just
awkward.
say no.
I was running up the stairs.
I walked and talked with Jeb Bush once, who's like, every one step is like 6 of mine, and I look like a little, cartoon character. Like, never walk, never walk on camera. Just sit. So you still believe that you can that you can pull this off, that you can the only sort of way out is through, and you're going to get through by keeping the focus when the question is about the bureau, keeping the focus on the work and the mission.
That's it.
And you think that you can stave off the firings and the purge and the retribution at this point.
Yes. And I didn't think just doing that would be a winning strategy, just like by changing the narrative or changing his mind or their mind. So kind of exposing like, no, this is who we are now. And anybody that you thought was problematic in leadership positions, meaning like a former director, whatever, like, obviously I disagree with his take on the former directors. All of them have been brilliant. Flawed, but so am I. We're all flawed in different ways, but the experiences I had with them, they're incredibly professional.
Integrity.
Yes.
Comey.
Yes.
Mueller.
Yes.
Ray?
Yes. Yeah.
Not corrupt?
Not that I ever observed.
Not partisan?
Not that I observed. However, like I said, flawed and flawed men and women make mistakes. And I'm sure they did.
I mean, one of them filed a motion today because he's been indicted for the seashells. One of them, Trump said good when he learned he was dead. And the other hasn't said a word. How does that make you feel?
The comments made after Director Mueller passed away were staggering. And I wrote, like a 1-page letter about Director Mueller that went nowhere. I just kept it for myself because I had to get my thoughts on paper and process that. And I don't have it with me, but he dedicated his life to service. He sacrificed, his family sacrificed so much. And for his passing to be celebrated, and for his character to be challenged even after he passed was, I don't have a word to describe how I feel about that. But it's not a positive one. And as far as the just like very personal criticisms of other directors, that just has not been my experience with any of them. They're public servants. They're good men. And like I said, like everybody might make a mistake, but I don't agree that any of their mistakes led to any catastrophic failure that compromised our mission.
Do you think that the current leadership is making catastrophic mistakes that compromise your mission?
I think some of the behavior that we're seeing it can absolutely lead to a compromising of the mission. Yes. If the process were to be compromised. And where I find faith is that no matter the efforts that we see that are publicly available being made, what's going on in Georgia regarding the 2020 election, for example, these efforts are being made through the executive branch. However,
You mean directed by the
I can't say they're being directed by them, but I mean, obviously it's coming through and being executed on the ground by that branch. However, for any consequences or accountability or proof and evidence that there was any corruption or wrongdoing or illegal activity, it has to go through the judiciary, it has to go through the court. And I still have faith in the system. So I think for me, where I find peace as I'm out in the wilderness, when I was still in, and if I was still in, I was very close to the challenges and the problems, and that it can be very loud and hard to focus. Now that I'm out here in the wilderness, I am starting to figure out how to leverage sometimes this very lonely silence to prepare and to think and to diagnose and analyze the challenges, hopefully when I'm allowed to go back in service in any capacity. And it's starting to become less hazy. And that's where I find hope, because there's a lot of chest beating. There's a lot of backslapping going on. And that's okay, because anybody who's holding these positions of power right now, any mistakes that they're making, any potential damage they're causing to the institutions that they lead, it's just for a little bit more. And there's a lot of people that are either placed in exile, like myself, and a lot of the DOJ that were pushed out, that are watching and with no malice or thoughts of retribution in their heart, who want to serve and correct if there are broken pieces, to pick them up and rebuild. And I think we're all going to be prepared for that, no matter where we end up 2.5 years or whatever it is. And that, I find a lot of hope in that.
So take me back to the days that you're there and put between the workforce and the Trump leadership.
Yeah, so pretty early on, and I mean, I was only the acting director for 31 and a half days. Who's counting? pretty early on, like in the first week or two, we had a good operating rhythm going on. Like I'm not a double Yaley like director Ray. And it takes me a little longer to read. And also I was never, I didn't actually I skipped a lot to get to the acting director. So I would come in very early before anybody was there. I'd probably leave my house around 4:30 and I'd read the intel briefs in the limo. I would get in, I would work out when I could, had a little shower in the office, which is pretty sweet. Get my suit on, that was a new thing for me too. I was not a suit guy every day. I'm not central casting for what an FBI agent looks like, and what most people think we should look like. But this is all I got. It's not a lot to work with. And you should see some of the comments people make about how I look. They're hilarious.
Never read
good
the
for them. Yeah, good for them. But anyway, shower up, get changed, tighten the tie, make sure it's straight. Have Rob look at it, make sure I look okay. And then read the PDB, the Presidential Daily Brief. I don't need to tell you, but and then walk into the first brief with the top 20 or 30 leaders of the Bureau and get all the substantive divisions, like what's going on in counter intel, what is like the lead threats right now,
red,
what are the wins, what are potential risks that we need to mitigate, go around the room, get it all. Take about 5 minutes to digest it. And then Rob and I would walk across the street to DOJ and brief Beauvais and his team. And then at times we would be held back for stay-behinds and have conversations just with the three of us. Eventually that evolved, again, like a week or two into my tenure as acting director, was asked for what everybody knows I was asked for by now, which was a list of FBI employees that worked investigations into the president.
On both Mar-a-Lago and January 6th?
Yeah, it was specified in a memo that's detailed in the litigation. It was pretty specific, and then there were already names listed on there of other individuals, like heads of divisions and others. I offered, listen, I'm trying to understand the desired end state with your request.
What do you say?
They will be subject to a DOJ-led review. And I said, okay, I don't know what that means. Are you trying to say all the processes we just discussed? Is it internal inspections? Is it OIG? Is it Office of Professional Responsibility? I gave 3 or 4, and not just me, Rob and others, provided options. Like these existing processes, DOJ-led review was all we were met with. And so I put up, I don't want to use the term resistance, but I offered those solutions and was not met with anything in writing or verbally to reflect that those were the processes that the names would be subjected to.
And they wanted all those people fired?
He never said that it was with the intent to fire them. However, to hand over a list while also having digested all of the rhetoric coming from outside of our building, elsewhere in the executive branch and elsewhere in the government, I, again, made a personal assessment and decided that I was unwilling, unless it was told to me that it was a legal order, to submit the true names of almost, if not more than 6,000 FBI employees who worked those sensitive investigations against the people that were held responsible. Agents, analysts, and professional staff, some of whom were threatened by those people who we held accountable, that were responsible for those events, without full confidence that I wasn't walking them to the edge of a cliff of their employment to watch somebody else kick them off. Also, to potentially risk having their true name compromised, released, and then the threats to them and their families. I was not willing to tolerate that. Now, eventually, I was surrounded by very brilliant attorneys on the FBI side, a lot of former prosecutors who reflected that after I was internally very resistant and I was willing to provide a list with one name, my own. And that's not, I'm not saying that to be like, look at me, I'm a martyr. Not at all. But
Just to
that's,
give him a scalp.
yeah. And just now I was surrounded by very wise counsel that said, you know what's going to happen as soon as you do that. So yeah, and I'm at peace with that. However, it was explained to me, A, it's a legal order. You have to follow the order. So that's where I was going to say, okay, my name, boom, there's a list.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was reflected that, okay, you do that, you're fired today, very potentially.
Mm-hmm.
And then potentially a political appointee will take your place and then everybody could go. And so I'm not willing to accept that. And so we came up with other ways to get there. And unfortunately, eventually a list was submitted at first with our unique identifying numbers and not names.
The numbers, right?
And not as like a middle finger, but with clear articulation. And like, we do not want these names to be compromised and potentially released to the public with a cyber compromise or anything like that.
Right,
not inferring that they were going to do it on purpose.
Right.
But like, there are variables out of our control.
Yeah.
And I wasn't willing to take on that risk. And so we submitted the code numbers for identities. And that was following the letter of the order.
But eventually they got all the names, right?
Correct.
And then what happened?
A few things happened. Something that was, I would say, devastating was a part of the request, the termination memo, as it was so titled, was a list of current executives to include the top 6. You know, as the acting director, is like my closest counsel. It was all of the executive assistant directors responsible for all of the substantive divisions. So the head of all of national security, the head of all criminal, the head of all cyber, all the things. So there's about 6 of them, intelligence, all the things. All of their names were on the list, to include one of my very close friends who was in charge of the Washington field office. He was the commander of the hostage rescue team as well before me. He was on that list.
And they're all on the list because that investigation is so sweeping that it involved all of the tools and all the...
That's not how I read it.
What?
Again, I can't get into like the articulation because it's so hard for me to understand the why. These were public servants. These were dedicated career agents and analysts and professional staff. The way it was articulated in the termination memo, which is again embedded in the litigation, is a lack of faith that they would execute the administration's agenda. And I don't recall receiving any further justification. And so Rob and I gathered all of those individuals because there was a deadline associated with that memo that they need to either retire. And again, there were threats that they would be fired and lose their retirement. Rob and I were able to discuss with DOJ, like, listen, all of them, with the exception of one, are eligible to retire. Just give us an amount of time to give them a choice. And so the memo came over, it gave a deadline. And before the deadline, we gathered all of them and gave them that choice. You can either stay and accept the consequences that are written herein, or we can have you retired by the deadline. Now in the FBI, it takes a lot, like more time than you would think, because of administrative burden, so to speak, to retire. It could take a long time, like sometimes months. And so we brought in everybody who was responsible for like pushing a button to clear all of the different hurdles to get them retired within about 24 hours. And we brought them all in a room, and we were able to successfully, after they chose to retire, and I'm glad they did for their own and their family's benefits.
And how much experience was in that room retiring?
I mean, some of them had close to 30 years. Some of them had 20-something years. To be retirement eligible as an agent in the FBI, you have to have 20 years of service and be at least 50 years old.
And if their names hadn't been on the list, would any of them have left?
I don't want to speak for them, but none of them told me they were intending to leave during this time. They were forced out.
So what happens after that?
Well, in the FBI at headquarters in the Hoover Building, we refer to it as the 7th floor. So there is a secure compartmentalized information facility, or a SCIF, on the 7th floor, where all of those executives sit, and the director's office as well, deputy's director's office. Got real quiet after that. So on the night they retired, we all gathered in the director's conference room, and then we moved into the inner sanctum, and we just shared some time. We laughed. We had some, emotional moments, and then they all walked out together, and that was crushing, because then, it gets pretty lonely real quick. It's already lonely when you're at the top of an organization, and necessarily so sometimes. And it took me a while to appreciate that. But that pressure that comes with that loneliness is a privilege, because a lot is expected of you. Not everybody has the blessing to be in a pressurized environment where you have people who count on you. But after they left, that was really hard. And people were nervous to be elevated into those positions, because now they could potentially be a mark. It was a tough time. But in those moments where, throughout all of that, we'll call it turmoil, we communicated with the top of the bureau, but we also communicated responsibly to the entire workforce what was going on, to be truly transparent, and also be vulnerable. Before that, I had a lot of friends around the FBI, and as a member of the hostage rescue team, you're the perpetual away team, so you're deploying all over the country and the world. So you meet a lot of people. So a lot of people knew me, and I'm fortunate for that. But they knew who I was. They knew I was a member of the rank and file who ended up in this position. And so I enjoyed a level of trust, because I was fortunate to come up through the ranks from the rank and file. And then through our actions when we were thrust into that situation, and articulating in those moments that I was choosing the wrench with full knowledge of the consequences. The consequences were articulated to me in that room as well. That what's going to happen if you go through with this and show resistance and such. And I was like, yeah, and I'm ready for it. And then I told the wrench story, and this sounds cheesy, but it was a beautiful moment to me, because where I thought potentially I would see some people push away from the table, everybody tucked in, and I knew that side eye, like, how did you get here? Like, who do you know? Or did you do this? Were you involved? Like, I knew all of those potential concerns were gone, because I was one of a very few in that room that were not eligible to retire, and they knew what I'd be sacrificing. Myself and so many others that I've been so fortunate to participate in such high-risk missions and learn from in using sophisticated techniques on all kinds of awesome investigations, like really cool stuff, some of which we can never talk about. And I remember articulating, we're not getting shot at. Like, I've been shot at. I've had a fair amount of, more than your average bear, of life-threatening situations. And I've buried friends, and I've had to take lives, like much more dramatic and personally impactful situations. This was a different type of event, but I knew we were all going to go home at the end of the day. And I knew, like, someday, even if it gets worse, which it has, we can make it better together. And I truly believe that. It may make me sound like a fool, but I believe it, and I'm gonna make it come true if I'm allowed to. Even if I am just picking up dog crap in the canine kennel, I'll still be around.
I'll come help you with the dogs. I want to understand what happens after this traumatic departure of all these leaders, that they start sort of getting down to other very, very, very experienced agents. How do they take the next step, and how much time lapses between this day and the next round of purges?
The current director came in, 31 and a half days after the inauguration or so.
How was that? Did he say anything to you?
Yeah.
Did he
You know,
want to
he
take you to a, what's it called? Cage match?
he never offered, no.
No.
Or if he did, I forgot. So
Is he the one that has you vetted, or is that Bove?
So his involvement with how I became the acting director is unclear, if he was at all. I received a call from Emil Bove prior to the
Did you know
week
him
or so.
from, because he was in
I
the
worked
US
with him in New York.
Yeah,
He,
and he
he
was-
was a Southern District prosecutor. He was the co-chief of the.
and he
National
worked on
Security.
January 6 cases.
Yeah.
Volunteered to work on January 6 cases.
I was here, and he was like, I was on the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and he was.
Did you
one of
work
the
on
prosecutors.
January? You worked on a January 6 case.
I wasn't a case agent. I was in a leadership position. So
But you
I've
touched one of them.
I've touched a bunch of them because it transcended my time in New York, where some of the subjects we had arrest warrants to take them to the next step in the accountability. And then when I went to the hostage rescue team, some of the fugitives that had outstanding warrants were identified, and I was commanding the hostage rescue team, and we went and apprehended them as well. So I touched it in different parts, but usually at the arrest part. So I wasn't a case agent investigating it.
And that's who they were most obsessed with purging from the Bureau?
The request was in the survey that we had to build to identify anybody who was a part of those investigations was so large because, I mean, it takes all different types of skill sets and job series to conduct an investigation. And so it was just a broad swath.
So Bove, who worked on January 6 cases, is in charge of having you vetted for this first foray, this first role as acting director. What was your vetting like?
So at the time, I was told that I would receive a phone call from a White House transition team person who's tasked to DOJ, and I was being vetted to be the acting deputy director.
Right.
number
This is
2.
before you and
Yeah, so I was
guys
across the river
Yeah.
in Newark. I was a brand new special agent in charge. I was like 3 weeks in. And I was like, oh, this will be interesting. Didn't know what to expect. And I received a phone call from this guy. His name's Peter Ingrassia. I gave him a quick Google before he called me. And, he was involved in the first administration. He looked really young. And I was like, okay, this is all new to me. I was like, I guess this is standard for what happens. Nobody had articulated that I was being vetted for the deputy. It was to come back to headquarters to serve in a higher ranking position during the transition.
did you know how you were on their radar? Did you think it was from Emil Bove?
So I assumed such
Yeah.
because before that, despite what some people say or think, I had never met the current director of the FBI. I'd never met him or spoken to him besides like a very short phone call in that lead up to that conversation with Ingrassia. So he called me. I didn't answer. I went to the chief division counsel and I was like, listen, I got this phone call about a vetting interview for a high level position at headquarters. He's a transition team guy. I was like, is it okay that I talk to him? He's like, what's it about? I was like, I'll tell you later. So he's like, yeah, you're good. So I go through the interview process, and he asked me 5 or 6 questions, and
What did he ask you?
it's all in the complaint, but some of them were, you're being vetted for a high level position in the FBI. I was like, well, I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, admittedly. I was like, because it just felt weird. I was like, why am I being vetted for a job I'm already in? Not the deputy, but I'm an FBI agent already. And it's we call them TDYs, temporary duty assignments. So it's just a TDY. It's a pencil whip. So why am I being vetted for this? It made me uncomfortable because it felt political before I even had the conversation. I was like, okay, I guess this is how it goes. I don't do politics. He says you're being vetted. He asked me who I voted for. I told him that it's, you have my resume in front of you. Correct? And he said, yeah. So I'm currently a special agent with the FBI. It's illegal for me to talk about that with you. And there's only one person that knows who I voted for, and you're not her. He's like, okay, got it. One of the other questions was how I felt about DEI. And I told him that, listen, I believe in diversity because of the reasons I said earlier. We need to have a diverse workforce that reflects the people we serve. He asked me if the FBI employees who were responsible for storming Mar-a-Lago should be held accountable. And I said, well, hold on. Like, I wasn't a part of that investigation. However, there has been no misconduct or impropriety or corruption that I've been made aware of. There are processes to investigate that. And if those processes have already taken place, or if there's allegations that require initiating those processes, then that's where I lie. But they conducted those warrants based off of a properly predicated, legally submitted and sworn out court order from a judge. So no. He reflected that he understood I couldn't tell him who I voted for, so he asked when I started supporting the president. I didn't answer that question. And he's like, he seemed impatient, and he said that, okay, I understand you can't talk about that. Just tell me if you voted for a Democrat in the last 5 elections. And then I concluded the conversation after that and hung up.
Do you think that that is their litmus test for people that did get jobs?
I don't know from experience if that is or was a litmus test to achieve leadership positions within the FBI, from within the FBI.
Mm-hmm.
I really hope it's not. And if it is, I really hope that people understand that they cannot answer those questions. It's, again, a violation of the Hatch Act for some of those questions. It's completely inappropriate and unethical and illegal.
When they ask you if you think the agents that stormed Mar-a-Lago should be held to account, does it give you any hesitation about going into the deputy director role? Do you think that that's what you're going to be asked to do?
Yes, it did. And I had that conversation with Emil Bove later that night. And I told him, I was like, he's asking me all these inappropriate questions. Like, if this is going to be political, or if I'm going to be asked to take any political action whatsoever, I want nothing to do with this. And he said, no, he's just, I flipped it. So he told me I failed the vetting interview, and I was like, yeah, okay. Yeah. And that I was combative. So, and that
you're hired.
Yeah, I was like, okay, whatever. I don't have a comment on whether I was combative or not.
What happens to ML Bove to be that person you can have that candid conversation with, to the person who basically is telling career prosecutors to, quote, fuck the orders from federal judges, and who is, it seems, the person orchestrating the complete politicization of the Eric Adams case?
Man, I wish I had the answer to that question. It was devastating to watch the change. Or just, it made me feel foolish to a degree that I didn't see it coming. You know, because I wasn't buddies with Emil Bove. I worked with him in 2020, 2021-ish, and I hadn't talked to him until the week before the inauguration last year in 2025. And so I lost touch with him. I was aware that, he was a defense attorney for the president in between terms and this, that, and the other thing, but I still had faith. I mean, he was a hitter as a prosecutor. Like, I trusted him then. You have to trust your teammates with verification sometimes, and he proved it when we were working together. And then to go from the first few days to a week or whatever, where, okay, we have an operating rhythm, it's going okay, we're not being asked to do anything weird, and then for it to change so aggressively, so quickly, it was devastating. I mean, to me, in the moment, it was a transformation, but that transformation probably took place beforehand, and I just didn't see it coming.
Is it as big of a personal revelation to see what these people, appointed by a person, elected by the American people, did to this institution you love? I mean, where do you place it in terms of these other pivot points in your career, Syria or 9/11 or other points that sort of make you kind of pay attention to the path that you're on and the things that you're doing?
Yeah. So again, while I'm out in these streets or in the wilderness,
A lot of time to think about it, right?
Yeah. So, and I'm working hard. I'm working. I don't want to sound like I'm just wandering in the woods.
I don't mean wandering, like actually wandering. Like I don't mean like getting in your steps.
Yeah, I'm
wandering.
just gonna walk back to
I
Virginia.
just mean like you're not working cases. You're thinking about how to rebuild the FBI and the department on the other side of this.
Sure,
and
even if I'm
Jack
just
Smith.
a small, absolutely, yeah, and he should. Jack Smith has made heroic efforts, and he is not what some people are calling him. He's the man. Like, whatever he said about me, I could say 10 times more about him.
So you're a
in
folk
all
hero.
The good ways. I can't say I'm a folk hero, but he deserves to be referred to and seen as a folk hero, if not an actual hero, because the most common career path that I was exposed to for the prosecutors that I partnered with as the FBI DOJ relationship, which is nested, a lot of real hard-hitting prosecutors, they come out of, sometimes an Ivy League institution, like incredible students. They'll do clerkship or they'll go to another law firm or whatever. They end up as a prosecutor, a federal prosecutor. They serve for a few years, and then they go to a white shoe firm, make a ton of money, and then move up within the private sector, or come back in a leadership position within the DOJ. Jack could have done that, and he didn't. He served for 30-something years as a doer. That is rare. He worked his ass off, and he did what he was told, and he never violated any of the laws or the rule of law or the ethics and morals that are required of him and people like us by the American people. Jack Smith is the man, and he doesn't deserve what he's going through right now.
Jack Smith said to me he expects to be indicted. What do you think it would be like for an FBI agent to be asked to investigate Jack Smith?
We'll use FBI agent, it's not unlike receiving the orders that I received. If they are legal orders, then that's the job, right? But that is not, you cannot violate the investigative processes. There are gated evolutions throughout the investigative process, and you need to go in front of a judge or a magistrate to swear out that next level. So if there's subpoenas, there's all the things in the beginning of an investigation usually that are part of the investigative process. It's normal. Some of those investigative techniques require a higher level of judicial approval. You have to be able to prove that you need to use those. And so to initiate an investigation, you have to meet the minimum requirements to initiate that. And you assess that as you go through.
I mean, judges are stopping the process right there. I mean, the Jerome Powell investigation didn't even get to subpoenas.
Right. And that's why, I think when Jack told you he doesn't think a lot about that, it's because, and I don't want to speak for Jack, but I'll speak for myself. We trust the process still. And for somebody from way up to reach way down, you still got to go through the judiciary. And I still believe in it.
Jim Comey said it was the one leg of the three-legged stool that still stands. And then someone pointed out a couple of days later, a one-legged stool doesn't stand. How long can we wobble like this as a country?
I have faith. I have faith
wobble
that we
for
can.
2 years?
I think we can balance for as long as it takes. We have been through a lot as a country, and we will continue to go through a lot. I was telling my kids, every generation thinks that the one behind them is so messed up, or well, geez, you guys have no idea. And with, a 19-year-old daughter and a 17, 14-year-old son's I know I'm wrong when I say that.
They're good. They're smart. They're really smart.
And resilient.
You got to spend time with people that much younger than you to feel really great.
Yeah, and makes me feel really old. But it gives me a massive amount of hope.
Old and hopeful. Yeah,
not you, me.
Yeah. No, me too.
But while I'm out here, I'm trying to see much, and learn much, and suffer much as well, because I think that's the path to wisdom. I don't know if I'll ever achieve wisdom, but I'm not going to stop trying. And while I'm taking it all in and assessing it without becoming a victim of all the headlines and all of the sound bites being put out, either by the administration or those who resist it, just soak it all in and be a responsible consumer of information, and to read diversely and broadly and read things I don't agree with, to challenge myself. I think that's going to be the key to the balancing act, because you can hold one side in this hand. It's going to take holding the other side in this hand to be able to achieve that balance. If I concentrate just on the negative, I'm going to fall over. So that's kind of my approach. And that's why I think we can balance and have patience, but also prepare through hope and through purposeful and measured preparation, with an eye on resisting the catastrophization of everything that's happening, because it's so loud and sometimes it's super aggressive, but also resisting the temptation to join what my father calls the fellowship of the miserable. And I was very close to that. At many parts of my career, where you just come in, you complain every day, and you just suck the energy out of a room, and you offer no solution. I'm not just trying to be this hopeful guy. I certainly don't have to be, but I'm not a victim, and I don't think anybody else who's been through, Walter Giordani, Chris Meyer, Steve Jensen, Spencer Evans, the 5 of us got fired on the same day, a year ago next Saturday. None of us, if you ask us, you're a victim, or if you label us as a victim, I will speak for them in this sense. We will push back on that. Like, what happened. I think it happened for a reason. And, I told this story the other day. Like, I got in a motorcycle accident a couple of weeks ago. And I got up, and the first person to me was an African-American female in her 50s. And she's on the phone with the police and emergency services. And she's like, I don't know, I just flew off the bike. I was like, no, I hit a deer. And I looked at the deer's gone. I said, no, I swear, I'm good at this.
So she's calling in like a concussion inspection.
Right, yeah. So she's calling because she
like,
sees me just go
I didn't
airborne.
See a deer.
Yeah. So, and the second person to me was a young white female in scrubs. And then it was a 2-lane road. And then the third, fourth, fifth people to me were Hispanic laborers that were in the truck that would have killed me if I flew into the other lane. None of them asked my name. None of them asked who I voted for. None of that. They just saw a guy in America that was in trouble who needed help, and they were there to help me. And experiences like that is what I was referring to before. That's clearing the haze. If I slid left instead of right, I could very well not be sitting with you. And so I stand up, dust myself off. And as I move through the weeks that follow, that haze is starting to disappear. Like, all right, I believe that I'm here for a reason. I don't know what that reason is yet, but I'm going to be looking a little harder.
Thank you for taking this time to talk to us.
Thanks for sharing time with me. It's an honor, really.